We have an interesting show for you tonight. We're going to get into some news that is pertinent, and then we are going to talk about something that you have done some extensive research on.
Right. We'll hit the news first, but, we talk often, and I think this is extremely important. We talk about the Olympics, we talk about the Super Bowl, we talk about the symbolism, and I really believe that a key component here to the playbook of the people that are taking our country down, taking the world down, is to understand that they communicate through satanic rituals, symbolism, providing occult messages to one another as well as a global audience. If we understand that, we can look at things like the Super Bowl, things like the halftime show, the Olympics, and see the hidden hand that's guiding all of this. So I think it's important. But first, let's hit some very important news topics. By the way, I do want to mention our sponsor. Portions of our broadcast tonight are sponsored by Audible.com. Folks, Audible.com. It's a leading provider of premium digital spoken audio, information, and entertainment on the Internet. It's a consumer service. We are customers. It allows you to choose the audio versions of your favorite books. They've got a library of over 150,000 titles. You can purchase individual books, or where the real savings are, you can sign up for an Audible listener program. It gives you book credits each month for a very low monthly fee. Just go to our website, HomelandSecurityUS.com, click on the Audible link. It'll take you over to Audible.com. There, you'll find yourself at www.audibletrial.com/CFP radio. You get a free audiobook and a 30-day trial just by signing up there via our website. So with that, let's hit some news.
All right. We're going to start off with some gun news. In Connecticut, tens of thousands of Connecticut residents are refusing to register their guns under a new law. Tens of thousands of Connecticut residents could soon be considered felons by the state if they continue to ignore restrictive new gun control laws passed last year, shortly after an armed rampage at an area elementary school left more than 24 dead. Last April, Governor Daniel Malloy signed into law a slew of new firearm restrictions that require, among other items, residents to register powerful assault weapons and high-capacity magazine with the state. The people of Connecticut had until the end of last year, almost 1 year to the day after Sandy Hook Elementary School massacre, to license their arsenals. Only a fraction have followed the new law. However, they could all soon face serious consequences if the state decides to take action.
Notice the inflammatory language. There are arsenals. Okay. But nonetheless, really, arsenals? Folks, look, I know people.
Powerful assault weapons.
Right,
semi-automatic.
Exactly.
I mean, we're talking about semi-automatic weapons as well, which are the majority of the weapons out there.
Do you know, speaking of this gun law, and I know you've got more on this, but in New York State, for example, they reconfigured the AR-15 just by appearance. Really, the functionality of the AR-15 remains the same.
Yeah,
but they reconstructed it, reconfigured it. It almost looks like a paintball gun in a way.
Because New York passed a law, passed a bill or law that says
the SAFE Act, in addition to the other.
That,
right.
Guns that have I forget what it was, 2 or more certain traits like pistol grip or
and just a flash suppressor and stuff like that.
Ridiculous things are considered assault weapons if you have too much accessories or if the gun is too easy to hold and comfortable to, you know what I mean?
Oh, it's ridiculous. I mean,
so they have to go back and custom make the guns so they can I guess be law abiding as gun manufacturers, but it's all smoke and mirrors because what is the objective? They want the guns out of the hands of the people. This is just making gun manufacturers redesign guns to that do the same things, sit there until a person decides to pick it up and use it. But you're muted.
I wasn't muted before. And yeah, thank you. All right, but the AR-15 in New York State, the way they did this is, in a way, you look at this and you think, good for the gun manufacturers, and it's great. It's almost like an in-your-face way to say, you know what, you passed this law, we conform to the law as a gun manufacturer, so we create the AR-15 without any loss of real functionality, yet it conforms to your so-called restrictive law, but nothing's changed. It's a win in the win category in a way, but there's still this great assault on the Second Amendment.
Yes. And I started with this story because it actually is the least critical and mind-blowing of them all. But it goes on to say here that on Thursday of this week, journalist Dan Hare, Connecticut's Hare of the Connecticut's, the concurrent newspaper, wrote the state police had received only 47,916 completed registration forms by the end of last year, according to his report. That statistic is just a sliver of what it should be. The state has received 50,000 registrations by now. He wrote, then that could represent as little as 15% of the assault weapons now classified by the state as warranting new paperwork under April's law. No one has anything close to definitive figures, but the most conservative estimates place the number of unregistered assault weapons above 50,000 and perhaps as high as 350,000.
Now, please, folks, those words, assault weapons, are the words of the publication, not our words. These are merely weapons. Assault weapons is a pejorative term. It's hyped up. Of course not. It's interesting to me, the ATF, the gun dealers, they do have the Form 4473. So they would know, for example, when a person has purchased a firearm that would fall within this particular registration requirement, or this confiscation ultimately requirement.
Well, see, a real assault weapon would be classified as one that was used to kill Border Patrol agent Terry Cook. Brian Terry. Sorry. A Fast and Furious weapon. You know, one of the ones that our government gave to drug cartels. That was an assault rifle.
Let them walk right across the was it? Do we know exactly if it was a fully automatic to classify it as an assault rifle? I don't think we know with any.
If my memory's correct, it was an AK-47.
But was it fully automatic, which would then make it really classified in that, put it in that classification? I'm not sure if it was, but it was purchased from. I don't think it was actually. It was because it was purchased from in the States and sent through a straw man purchase and ended up in Mexico.
Purchased. The ATF, after confiscating it from some poor citizen, they gave it to the drug cartel people in Mexico. But no, this the question here with this gun stuff in Connecticut is, what is going to be the outcome? Are they going to go door to door? Are they going to come after the gun owners? Are they going to take aggressive action, or are they going to send letters of warnings and then fines and et cetera, et cetera? But
we're not going to keep our eye on this. I don't believe personally that they would do that. I don't think necessarily that they would go door to door for all of the 4473s that are in place that they've got access to. They meaning the government. I do believe, however, they would pick a number of them, we'll say a dozen or two, and conduct some very high-profile raids at very inconvenient times, and show look how bad these people are for keeping these weapons, and they've got 10,000 rounds of ammunition and this bad, ugly, scary-looking assault, or as in their term, assault rifle. I could see that taking place, but I don't think that they would have. I could be wrong, but I would.
Well, listen to what here. Representative Stephen Dargo says this. He says, if you pass a law that people have no respect for and don't follow, then you have a real problem. I'm sorry, that was Representative Tony Guglielmo. And it goes on to say, but even if Connecticutians find the gun law improper, federal courts have so far said that's not the case. Last month, U.S. District Judge Alfred Covello issued a 47-page ruling calling Governor Malloy's legislation constitutional, even though it imposed some restrictions on firearm owners. While the act burdens the plaintiffs' Second Amendment rights, it is substantially related to the important governmental interest of public safety and crime control, the judge said.
Well, when it comes down to it, the ultimate law of the land is the Constitution. Now, I understand, folks, that the codified laws that go beyond that. However, if you look, there is no law. If you read, folks, if you're familiar with Dr. John Coleman, that's with a C, Dr. John Coleman, he's written a number of books, including What You Need to Know About the Constitution, what you need to understand about the Constitution. And his position, based on his research, and if there's any scholar about the Constitution of the United States, through research and through the scouring of the congressional records and such, it would be Dr. John Coleman. And I've got his books, and he said his finding is if a law is not consistent or antithetical with the United States Constitution, then not only is it a bad law, but it's unenforceable. Now, I do understand, of course, things like the IRS and other things that are not that don't comport with the Constitution. But in this case, I think you're playing with, especially when it comes to your Second Amendment rights, I think you're playing with, the United States government is playing with a group of people. I don't think that I could be wrong, as I said, but I don't believe that there's going to be much cooperation with this lawless regime on this issue. I really don't believe that, Joe.
Right.
Except for the sheeple.
What concerns me is you have the governor pushing this, and you have judges ruling that the governor's making law, his new law, is constitutional, even though it imposes restrictions on a right that is given to us to protect us from government, which the right is not for governments to change. The rights are there for governments to have their borders, their guidelines, to know, how far they can go. Yes, we can do X, Y, and Z, but, we can't stop and put up a TSA molestation checkpoint. We're not allowed to search without stop and frisk, without a warrant. We're not allowed to infringe on a gun owner's rights because the Second Amendment clearly states that the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not infringed. It doesn't say, you can tweak laws so that it helps curb the interest of public safety and crime control. But anyway, it's just ridiculous. It's going to have to see what happens here because it's all going to depend on what actions and how aggressively the authorities pursue this.
Test. I agree. This is going to be worth watching. It bears watching. It's going to be a good test. But this does kind of fall into the same parallel track as the Ohio National Guard training exercise on right-wing terrorism. Documents from an Ohio National Guard training drill conducted last January revealed the details of a fake disaster, a mock disaster, where Second Amendment supporters with anti-government opinions were the targets, were portrayed as domestic terrorists and the targets of this mock drill, this scenario. The Ohio National Guard 52nd Civil Support Team training involved a pilot from a local school district, involved plot from local school district employees to use biological weapons in order to advance their beliefs and about protecting gun rights and Second Amendment rights. The Ohio National Guard and the law enforcement authorities went along with this and painted, of course, you might say this is nothing new, painted the Second Amendment advocates and gun rights advocates as domestic terrorists once again. But they had this pretty elaborate drill that involved biological or Ohio National Guard team discovering this biological weapons cache that was being produced in the school. And of course, they triggered this containment decontamination process. In the end, however, we're seeing that the Ohio National Guard continues, or is at least publicly stating, that the right-wing, conservative, pro-gun, pro-Second Amendment supporters are, along with Tea Party members as well, by extension, are in fact domestic terrorists. There is this huge, and also the U.S. Department of Homeland Security is acting as the scheduling agent and the agenda provider for all of this, saying we are going to demonize these Second Amendment supporters. So what we have all across the board, all across the country, is this backdoor slamming of the Second Amendment supporters, pro-gun, pro-Second Amendment, pro-constitutionalist, and we've got to watch.
Yeah, and going along with this, the pro-constitutionalist, Rand Paul issued a statement yesterday about the Fourth Amendment. He's actually part of a lawsuit against the NSA spying. Here's a 2-minute clip of what he had to say.
Our founders never intended for Americans to trust their government. Our entire Constitution was predicated on the notion that government was a necessary evil to be restrained and minimized as much as possible. When we learned that the NSA was collecting the phone data of every American last June, it posed a serious constitutional question. Do we no longer have a Fourth Amendment? The Fourth Amendment was included in the Constitution precisely to prevent the issuing of general warrants in which blanket authority is given to government to spy on citizens at will. Individualized suspicion of citizens' records is precisely the kind of overreach we fought a revolution over. The colonists did not appreciate a British government that would go door to door searching anyone and everyone without probable cause or suspicion. The lesson of the American Revolution was that this should never happen again, and yet the NSA's data collection program is the modern equivalent of this practice. President Obama cited Paul Revere in his speech, but Paul Revere rode through the streets to tell us the British were coming, not the Americans are coming. The Constitution is not a negotiable piece of parchment to be ignored or abused at the president's whim. Washington leaders are expected to obey and protect what they took an oath to uphold. And if this means taking them to court over it, so be it. If the seizure and surveillance of Americans' phone records across the board is now considered a legitimate security precaution, there is literally no protection of any kind guaranteed anymore to any American citizen. We cannot allow this administration to continue to treat the Constitution as a dead letter. I will continue to fight this overzealous government surveillance program, and I invite you to join me. Today is the day we begin to fight back. If you want to learn more, visit defendthefourth.com. Thank you very much.
Now, I just want to add in there to punctuate this. It's kind of almost a non sequitur, but I'll do this anyway because we're talking about the Second Amendment. Folks, without the Second Amendment, without the pro-Second Amendment support, once they take our ability to defend ourselves away, if that is what does happen ultimately, how are we going to protect the rest of our rights, that are God-given rights, not given by man, but given by God, delineated by the Bill of Rights? How are we going to protect that? We're not going to be able to.
Absolutely. And is very surreal here. We have another article, Supreme Court to decide whether to hear cases regarding right to bear arms. The U.S. Supreme Court is expected to decide this month whether to hear two cases seeking clarification on what the Constitution's framers intended in granting citizens the right not only to own but also bear arms. Lyle Dennison, the National Constitution Center advisor, writes on the Philadelphia Inquirer's website that the NRA has of late brought two cases before the Supreme Court challenging prevailing legal wisdom that while the Second Amendment grants U.S. citizens the right to own or keep arms, that right does not necessarily extend to their ability to bear arms outside of their personal residence. In one case, rooted in Texas, the NRA is reportedly challenging a state law permitting minors to own guns, but stipulating all the same that they are, in fact, too young to apply for and thus possess the license necessary to carry them in public. The explicit guarantee of the right to bear arms would mean nothing, the NRA's filings in the Texas matter reportedly argues, if it did not protect the right to bear arms outside of the home, where the amendment already guarantees that they may be kept. So we're going to be seeing some ruling or some talk about this and some rulings from the Supreme Court. And
that's a very dangerous area, by the way.
Should the Supreme Court ultimately decide to hear the cases, the Inquirer reports the matters will likely be held over until the court's next term in October.
Now, folks, don't forget, because I don't hear very many talk show hosts talking about this as well. Don't forget the Obama regime, along with Clinton, now Kerry, their support for the UN Arms Trade Treaty, also known as the Small Arms Treaty.
You know, I was doing some research on Hillary Clinton and her past on speeches and what she said on different issues pertaining to freedoms that we have. And I found one, Hillary Clinton on guns is the title, where she says, "I don't want to take your guns."
Yeah, well, they can say anything that they want. Right. It's crazy. But
exactly. I mean, just like we saw with Bush, just like we saw with Obama, you know, just like we're going to see with the next president if we have one. You know, they make tons of promises and they're not going to do this or that. I mean, just Obama is a perfect example. Obamacare. All the things he said he was going to change and make better and stop from the Bush years, he continued, and not only continued them, he expanded and you know, doubled down on these policies. And the same thing is going to happen with the next leader. They are, for people who think that they are the leader of the free world, they are the face of the leader of the free world. They have about as much power, I believe, as a newscaster who reads from a teleprompter.
Well,
in a sense.
Yeah. But we have to look. Let's look at the Obama regime and the people in the White House right now. No doubt, the most anti-gun people, the anti-gun regime in the history of the United States, and the most pandering to a very corrupt United Nations. And it should be alarming to everyone who wants to keep their Second Amendment freedoms. And we can trace this back to Fast and Furious, apparently a crime here in the country, in this country, and a crime against international law that everyone has forgotten about or no one wants to talk about. Remember Fast and Furious? Katie Pavlich wrote a great book called Fast and Furious, Obama's Bloodiest Scandal and the Shameless Cover-Up. Folks, this is a bipartisan cover-up. This is not just an Obama cover-up, because both Republicans and Democrats are involved. Government criminal activity like this must not be allowed, yet it is. This has cost people their lives. But when we're looking at the teaming up with the United Nations, the Arms Trade Treaty, ostensibly to prevent terrorists from getting their hands on guns and military equipment, come on. The alleged purpose of the Arms Trade Treaty is to prevent crime, terrorism, and even war Well, how are they going to do that? They're going to do it by regulating the sale of guns. Who are the biggest supporters of the treaty? They're some of the same and most brazen supporters of terrorism. When you've got Iran, Syria, Cuba, and I include Syria in there, obviously, but when they support the arms trade treaty, what does that tell you? Iran supports it. Cuba supports it. What does that tell you? And they're on the same side as Hillary Clinton. And please, folks, Hillary Clinton has not gone away.
No, we talked about this last night. The study, the poll, or they looked at the three top major networks and saw how much time. I think it was 178 spots they gave Clinton in a week's time, and they're saying that they're doing this while she's not even a candidate. We're not even in the presidential election cycle yet, and they're really pumping her up. She's already got a war chest of money, I heard on the radio today. She's been fundraising. Obama's been helping her fundraise for the last 2 years, and she's way ahead of the game in that regard. But
I just want to say, and along with the current occupant of the White House, we can only say so many times that we've got a communist, socialist, Muslim president in the White House, or occupant of the White House, and who's plotting to take away the weapons, the defense system of Americans, and with the purpose of enslaving all of humanity, or merely the slaughter of humanity. We've seen this before historically. The Second Amendment supporters are suspected to have committed, I suppose if you look at what the media says, perhaps a good portion of the recent, when I say recent, I'm talking about over the last decade, of terrorist or violent acts on American soil. Now, the Mayors Against Gun Violence, the Bloomberg Initiative, the Mayors Against Illegal Guns, that whole anti-Second Amendment agenda, we have to understand what is taking place here. You've got this initiative by these low-level, relatively low-level local elected officials, mayors across the United States, who are gathering together to push this anti-gun, anti-Second Amendment agenda. And this is a full-on assault right now, and that's why we urge everyone to watch what's taking place in New England with respect to the Connecticut. What are they going to do? Folks, what are they going to do when the numbers don't add up? When they know that there are many, many guns out there, and the people are not complying with this malicious, bad law, what are they going to do?
They're going to call in their Russian training partners, or the private police force, or maybe Blackwater. I mean, who knows with this administration what they'll do? Are they going to be the ones to have egg on their face and look bad because they tried to push something through and the people pushed back and they stood down? I don't know. Like I said, it depends on how aggressively these people of authority, and trust me, if it is pushed aggressively, those orders will come from the highest up parts of our government.
Well, we do see this nightmare developing for Americans. Unfortunately, this really is not just a nightmare. This isn't some fantasy. It's very real. It's very dangerous. It is not a conspiracy. It's a fact that there is public deception, where there is deception against the public intended to destroy our right to keep and bear arms. And I know you've heard this before, and you might think, well, what's the news in this? We can't take the pressure off. We cannot stop talking about this. And if you're listening to this broadcast in the country that you've already lost your right to own a weapon through your country's laws, I mean, understand. Listen, This is look. I'll just close with this. Over the last couple of years, since Obama has been in office, there's been a very sophisticated, very long-term plan to neutralize gun owners, neutralize NRA voters, neutralize pro-Second Amendment advocates as a political force in national elections. There is that political element there too, but Prosecutor Fulsk to take away our Second Amendment rights through litigation, through regulation, through executive orders, through judicial fiat, folks through international treaties. In short, they're pulling out all the stops, using all three branches of government and their agencies to push a full court press against pro-Second Amendment people.
Now, listen to this. First of all, we talked about the 141,000 hollow point sniper rounds that DHS is buying. Now, DHS to purchase 75.1 million rounds of ammunition this year. Also, Ohio National Guard training envisions right-wing terrorism. Documents from an Ohio National Guard training drill conducted last January reveal the details of a mock disaster where Second Amendment supporters with anti-government opinions were portrayed as domestic terrorists. The ONG 52nd Civil Support Team training scenario involved a plot from the local school district employees to use biological weapons in order to advance their beliefs about protecting gun rights and Second Amendment rights. Portsmouth Fire Chief Bill Raisin told NBC 3 WSAZ-TV in Huntington, West Virginia, that the drill accurately represents the reality of the world that we live in, adding that such training helps us all to be prepared. Internal ONG documents provided to media trackers after repeated delays provide further context as to what WSAZ reported last winter. In the disaster preparedness scenario, 2 Portsmouth Junior High School employees poisoned school lunches with mustard gas, acting on orders from a white nationalist leader, William Pierce. The ONG team discovered that biological weapons being produced in the school required activation of contaminated and decontamination procedures. Participants in the disasters drills located documents expressing the school employees' anti-government sentiments, as well as a note identifying Pierce as the fictional right-wing terrorist leader.
That's an expansion on what I said earlier about the Ohio National Guard, right?
I just found this article, but they go on to say here that you didn't get into is that the Department of Homeland Security has been warning law enforcement agencies that a predicted rise in right-wing extremism will be fueled by proposed imposition of firearm restrictions and weapon bans and the election of the first African-American president. Sounds like came right out of a Southern Poverty Law Center handbook. Throughout modern history, individuals associated with left-wing causes have proven far more likely to commit acts of domestic terror. Anyway, they say no apology to the Ohioans who support limited government.
Exactly.
The Second Amendment appears to be forthcoming.
Right. But think about that for a second. Think about the Ohio exercise through the lens or in the context of Fast and Furious. I go back to Fast and Furious because I put that as the beginning of this very sinister operation against the Second Amendment, against our freedom, because the objective of the Fast and Furious operation, if you look at this from a very simple point of view, the Fast and Furious operation, which led to the murder of federal officer Agent Brian Terry, the only real plausible explanation for Fast and Furious would be that the Obama regime and the Justice Department wanted to somehow prove their false and fraudulent claims that, and I'm quoting Obama here, that more than 90% of the guns recovered in Mexico came from the United States. Folks, remember one thing. Just like the foreign policy in Syria, this regime does not change or alter their objectives based on public opinion. They will push and prod and continue forward with their objectives, whether it's foreign policy or domestic policy, despite public opinion. And if they are For example, Benghazi exposed the gun running operation, the arms operation. Fast and Furious exposed the same thing. That was the domestic component to Benghazi. Done by or in conjunction with the Justice Department and the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, Firearms, and Explosives to conspire to allow, encourage, and assist an illegal weapons smuggling operation, spending our money, our tax dollars, to buy guns for the drug cartels, knowing full well that thousands of these guns were headed directly into the hands of the most violent criminals on both sides of the border. Then they point and say, you see, all of these guns, or at least 90% of the guns, came from the United States, which is why we need gun laws. So you take, and what did Fast and Furious end up doing? No one talks about this. I mean, few talk about this. While Holder was stonewalling any congressional inquiry, and for what it's worth, the congressional inquiries were pretty lame. But while they were doing that, 4 border states instituted or were compelled to institute greater gun control or stricter gun control laws. So now look at the Ohio National Guard that we just referenced. Joe, you had the other half of what I had. Look at that. Is this not a, can we not say that the flow of the control of information, the control of people, I mean, reality is decided by the power elite and the media. Look how everything is being portrayed by both. This is a creation of a fictitious reality that is hitting hard against pro-constitutionalist, pro-Second Amendment people. Yeah. This is all part of it. This is part of this is an extension. This Ohio exercise is an extension of the Fast and Furious operation in terms of media and public sentiment.
And we know that they've been planning this for a long time. I mean, we'll go back to the 2009 Department of Homeland Security Domestic Extremism Lexicon, where it lists the alternative media, and it says this you could be a possible domestic extremist if you are the alternative media, a term used to describe various information sources that provide a forum for interpretation of events and issues that differ radically from those presented in mass media products and outlets.
Okay, now, think about this. What we just said about the cases going to the Supreme Court. Think about the recent Judge Sonia Sotomayor. She was questioned about the Supreme Court's historic ruling, Columbia versus Heller. And folks, if you want to know about the gun or weapons, the Second Amendment weapons, the constitutionality, cite that particular case. Well, there's a couple of cases. District of Columbia v. Heller. The Second Amendment protects an individual's right to bear arms of all law-abiding Americans. Now, when she was questioned during her nomination hearings, instead of admitting her true beliefs and intentions, she completely dodged the question. She told members of the Senate Judiciary Committee that she considered the Heller case to be settled law. That's like saying, well, it's kind of like Hillary Clinton throwing her hands up and saying, what difference does it make? That's the same type of attitude. Now, after her nomination, or after her confirmation, she turned around. Sotomayor turned around and did just the opposite of what she suggested. In the landmark case of McDonald versus Chicago, Sotomayor voted to allow anti-gun cities and states to violate the Constitution, the very Constitution that she supposedly was confirmed to uphold, but she voted to deny the individual right to keep and bear arms that the Supreme Court had affirmed just 2 years previous. She wasted absolutely no time in signing into law a very freedom-threatening opinion declaring that she could find nothing in the Second Amendment's text, history or underlying rationale that could warrant characterizing it as fundamental or as a fundamental right. Now, we moved to Kagan. She used the same scripted settled law meme, despite a very clear record of being hostile to our rights, to gun owners' rights, to constitutional rights. That stems from her days in the Clinton White House. So over the past half a decade, we've seen two nominees, two very anti-Second Amendment nominees confirmed into the Supreme Court, Kagan and Sotomayor. You can expect, and I do expect, some problems at the Supreme Court level. So now that Obama has been reelected and he's got nothing to lose, oh boy, and think about this, folks.
And we have some executive action news today.
Well, I just want to say that, we've got, 4, I think, out of 9 Supreme Court justices over the age of 70. And I think by the time Obama does leave the White House, 3 will be over the age of 80, if they make it that long. So right now, it's very possible, just as we saw earlier with a lot of Obama, with his change of... Remember when Congress changed the rules about, well, we don't have to avoid, this filibustering and such with judicial nominees. Well, the bottom line here is to fast-track the anti-constitutional nominees at the federal judiciary level. And that's exactly what's taking place. This is like a third world country, but that's important. So watch what's going on in Connecticut. Watch what the Supreme Court is going to be doing with respect to the Second Amendment cases. This is very important. And watch the media and the power elite, or the government, whatever you want to call them, controlling the information to create this alternative reality. It's incredible.
The president signed the minimum wage hike executive order. By the power of his pen, President Obama gives minimum wage earning federal employees a 39% pay hike to $10.10 an hour, and there's nothing you can do about it, to benefit hundreds of thousands of people. We suspect that the president will remind us to the new MIRA program and its benefits, and how we should all tell our young friends to sign up for Obamacare, and how this is all paid for by the usual unicorn, Tears for Dollar swap from Zero Hedge. But in all seriousness, the federal minimum wage hike executive order will put all federal employees who were making minimum wage, it will raise their rates by 39%. Now, Dad, I have a question for you. It says in here, and physically and mentally handicapped workers. Is that a joke? Are they being silly? Or are they talking about some kind of social program? It says Obama's minimum wage earning federal employees and physically and mentally handicapped workers a 39% pay hike. The physically and mentally...
I have not looked at the law on that, or I have not looked at that close to answer your question. But what I'm more concerned with the minimum wage increase. Where is the statutory authority in his unilateral action? Who granted him the authority to do that unilaterally at the executive level? You know, we've seen the headlines. We've heard the State of the Union speech where Obama has stated he would act alone on the economy, bypassing Congress, and yet Congress claps. I don't understand this, except to say that the only possible explanation I can see is that they are in on this together. Because why would you clap when power and authority of your office is taken away from you by the stroke of a pen? This This basically is unconstitutional. Constitutionally, the president, the office of the president, requires congressional authorization for this type of an action. Now, you've got some lip service being paid by Republicans saying that the purported constitutional violation from the administration, it's unconstitutional. Sorry about twisting that around, but others have said, however, when I was looking through these different laws and responses, apparently there is some sort of strong constitutional case for this minimum wage plan, although it's not without any type of doubt. See, they're using this gray area. They're using this legal gray area, or at least what they call a legal gray area, to enforce and pass and to jam down the agenda.
Right. I mean, it's a government created gray area, but it is now because of
You're right.
complacency and lack of paying attention by the public. It has become what it has become. Just as Greg Jackson talks about the judges who are creating law left and right, making law when they're not to make law. They are to judge based on the laws that are already in place.
Just as a kind of a history lesson, this does come. The authority claimed, the statutory authority claimed by Obama, stems from a 1949 statute. It's the Federal Property and Administrative Services Act. Now, the problem with this is this particular act, the Federal Property and Administrative Services Act, it speaks to the economy and efficiency of federal contractors. So if those people who aren't paying attention to what's going on, if you just give it if you listen to the sound bites and nothing more, you might be led to believe that this alleged move, or this move under the auspices of this 1949 Federal Property Administrative Services Act, is with precedent and actual precedent and legitimate precedent. However, it's not. It's not, because it is outside of the economy and efficiency, and it addresses only the minimum wage of the contractors. It is taken out of context. Now, it's clear from the context of the action of Obama that he's not taking this action to increase the efficiency of federal contracting. Rather, the goal is to catalyze this mental, and I'll go back to what I said earlier, this new reality where it's changing the minimum wage and then creating the necessity, the venue, the environment for other minimum wage to be bumped up. You see how this is being done through little baby steps, and this guy is cagey, and people will say, well, he doesn't know what he's doing. He may not know he might not be the smartest guy in the room, but others with him, Obama, are certainly intelligent. So look toward this having huge effects within the economy. So what's the end game objective here? The end game objective is to really destroy the middle class. As much as it sounds good, well, let's raise the minimum wage for these poor people. As much as this sounds good, it's taking the ability or taking the choice out of the business, out of the income or the job creators, and putting it into the royal executive branch. But when I say royal, I mean royal. Now consider this, the recent party that Obama had at the White House with Michelle Obama. He talks about being a warrior for the middle class. Just as an aside, the dress that Michelle Obama wore, $12,000. That's the price tag on that dress. Now about this. Here's a guy, the poverty level of the United States is just under $12,000. The price of the dress that Michelle Obama wore was the equivalent of a 1 year's salary. Now, are these people connected to the working class?
At a time when the gap between the rich and the poor is at an all-time high, at a time when the nation's jobs have been taken away through these multinational treaties, the Trans-Pacific Partnership, the NAFTA,
GATT,
yes, and Obamacare now placing small businesses a burden on them, so they're forced to keep employees at 30 hours a week or to pay health insurance. It's such a joke, and they're laughing. I mean, I forget if it was W who said it or if it was you, but these people will act like they look at it like the Super Bowl halftime show. It's all in your face, but when they're asked about it, in interviews, they say, that's all conspiracy theories. I'm not a Satanist. I don't do this or that. I don't believe in that. They're putting it right in your face, and saying one thing and doing a completely different thing, and it is sickening that the starving children out there. I think every day there's 30,000 starving deaths in the world, something similar to that.
Right.
And we have behavior like this.
Well, we have to look back and just to connect the dots. This is why we have Paul McGuire. This is why we have Nathan Leal. This is why we have Steve Quayle and others to talk about this in-your-face kind of thing. Don't forget that the Satanists, the people with the real power here, are communicating not only amongst themselves, but they are communicating to us what they are going to do, thereby fulfilling this twisted, convoluted, satanic logic that they are fulfilling this duty to inform. And it's in our faces. It's right in our faces. But how many people will watch the Super Bowl halftime or have watched it in the Olympic ceremonies and said, oh, that's great entertainment? Very few. And it's interesting, too, when we or others begin to say, wait a minute, there's more to this.
Very many.
Well, there's increasing
entertainment.
Oh, yeah. Now, there are increasing numbers to the consternation of these people who are saying there's something wrong here. And we go back to the organizations like the Skull and Bones and all of these secret societies. And you've got to take a good hard look at all of these and how they interact and how they play. But what we're seeing here is this view, this presentation, this PowerPoint presentation in a Hollywood format. And I was talking to W the other day about Hollywood. What's Hollywood? What is Hollywood? What is Hollywood?
I've done some research on this.
Yes, and what is it? Do we want to? It's
escaping me, but it is a type of magic. It is a type of occultic witchcraft.
Well, it's used. The Hollywood is a type of wood that's used in witchcraft. Isn't that fitting? So
Very
anyway,
much so, yeah.
Yeah. But if we look at what's taking place, this is just to answer the people's questions. This is why we have people on to talk about this. And at after the break, we will talk about the greater satanic agenda here, the things to look for. As we were going to talk in depth about Maypole and about Beltane, and we will do that this week. But before we get into that, a lot of times there's a lack of fundamental information or even a confusion about the fundamental information. For example, you talk about numbers, numerology, gematria. What's that all mean? And why is it important? Well, that's fundamental knowledge that we all need to have to understand what we're seeing. For example, when Nathan Leal talks or Paul McGuire, when they talk about certain things. And this stuff goes very deep. But if we provide the fundamentals and discuss the fundamentals in an intellectual academic setting, I think a lot of light bulbs will be going off, and you'll say, "Wow, now okay, I get it. Now I get it. Now I get the importance of 322 or 19.5, or pick a number, 13 or 3, or where this comes from." So we're going to address both the numerology as well as the specific days of the year and time periods of the year first to lay the groundwork. Because once you know, for example, once you know the pagan, satanic holidays, the high holidays of occult symbolism, once you know that, then you can, for example, if something happens, a terror attack happens, ostensible terror attack, or some type of odd thing happens on a particular day, you can look at it and say, wait a minute, okay, it does fit because this particular time period would call for some sort of satanic, ritualistic kind of sacrifice. And folks, believe me when I say this, based on my research and talking with others who know a lot more than I do about this and going through a lot of books, a lot of materials, not internet, and stuff, you're not going to find this on the internet. This is extremely important information, and it's relevant and it's true. And to know the history behind it is extremely important.
Yeah, and we're going to get into this in the second hour, coming up here in a second. One last headline before we take the break. TSA wants a new generation of naked body scanners. NextGov.com reports that Homeland Security is seeking the next generation body imagers that will have the ability to scan through heavy coats and shoes and not require agents to monitor video screen. It goes on to say earlier in the article that the older or currently used body scanners were expensive and didn't work on the security level. They shredded privacy and they carried potential safety risks, yet that didn't stop the TSA from rolling these body scanners out without consulting Congress or the public. Now they want to roll out a more enhanced version of this imaging technology. We have more issues here with this new technology. What risks does it pose aside from privacy to your body? It's a X-ray type machine. You have radiation and several other issues here that we need to get into and go over this new type of body scanner.
We do need to go over that. I know we're up against the break. I just want to end this hour on kind of a happy note. I didn't tell you this earlier, folks. Leave it to me to do something like this. Again, just to end on a kind of a chipper, happy note. And you feel free to make fun of me, guys. I've been going like 110 miles an hour just all the time with here the last 10 days, with a lot of different situations taking place. And
must have been when I've not been around. I see you moving.
Really? You want to get into this? Really? Okay.
I'm joking.
Well, while I was doing some things, and folks are like this, I stopped, and I don't know, I wonder how many people have ever done this. I had my wife's car, which is my car, basically. I mean, it's our car. But I had stopped on my way back from another errand. I had stopped at a convenience store, and this convenience store is packed. Cars all over the place, and my wife's car is very nondescript. It looks like 100 other types of cars out there. I pull into a parking space, not my normal space. When I stop at this convenience store, I seem to have this normal space I park in, but this time I didn't. And I had 100 things on my mind. I ran into the store. I purchased what I needed to purchase. I came out. I went to my normal space. Of course, my car wasn't there. I grabbed the door handle, opened the door, and to my dismay and surprise, the guy sitting in the driver's seat looked at me and said, "What are you doing?"
Did it again, huh?
Well, this time I didn't sit in the car, but I opened the guy's door, and the car was the same type, make, and model of my wife's car. So I opened the driver's side door, not even looking. You just don't look. I mean, your mind is just, you're preoccupied. So I opened the door, and here was this guy about my age. He looked at me and said, no, in fact, I take that back. His first words were, "Can I help you?" When I opened the door. And had he not, look, we were both surprised. I mean, his eyes were wide, mine were wide, and I almost sat on his lap, or could have sat on his lap had he not said something. So you guys can make fun of me, but that's just the way it is.
Well, I almost turned down a busy one-way street today, so we're both off our game a little bit. Folks, you're listening to the Hagmann and Hagmann Report on this. Ladies and gentlemen, to hour number 2 of the Hagmann and Hagmann Report on this Wednesday, February 12th, 2014. We have a interesting curriculum and planned for this hour. We're going to be getting into occult holidays, Satanism, the satanic elite. What are their messages that they convey to each other? What are they doing to the people on this planet, both overtly and subliminally, and what can we do to combat against it?
Yeah, and I think this is a good primer. We are talking about the Maypole celebration. Why talk about this now? Well, we should talk about it now because the timing of it all. For example, Maypole, you're talking about May 1st, you're talking about the Beltane period of time. We are going to see this. We are soon from the middle of April, from April 19th roughly, or April 19th, I'm sorry, to May 1st inclusive, which is a 13-day period, we're going to see events take place that are critical when you see them take place to understand why they're taking place. But so we're going to be talking about prior to it actually taking place. So when you see events unfold, where you see things happen, you can say, wait a minute, this does conform with a certain ritualistic, satanic, Luciferian, power elite, hidden hand, whatever you want to call it. We can identify it. And we know their playbook at this point. It's kind of like watching a football game. If you see the players line up a certain way, you're able to identify by having their playbook, and seeing the different moves, we'll say of the quarterback or whatever, you're able to identify what that play is going to be. Therefore, there would be value in being able to see that happen in real time, or even before understanding the playbook before it happens, and putting things. Therefore, you can put things in perspective, because you can tune into. There are radio shows that will talk about or make reference to these. I don't know, make reference to the Bohemian Grove, make reference to Maypole and other things, but really don't get into why or what it's all about, or the depth of knowledge that you really need to have. And I think that's why it's really important. But, Joe, one of the things we were talking earlier, and one of the things I think, we throw numbers around. People throw numbers around a lot. And I think perhaps the first area of teaching, or the first area of exposure, should be some talking about the hidden meanings, or the meanings of the most significant numbers in the Illuminati system of numerology. Well, why? Because, again, we talk about 13 and 3, and et cetera, et cetera. Well, what does this all mean? And you've got your portion over there, I believe, right? With let me just see if we set this up right before we go. You've got your the numbers thing that you gave me earlier.
The book.
Well, that thing right there. Okay, yeah.
Guide you made for me.
No, you can hit that book. I would use that book as we go along here, but that this is the. But it's important to understand Illuminati numerology, and it's also through the context of the Bible. So jump in here, Joe, when I hit a certain number. I think perhaps 3, maybe, or 13. I'm not sure which. We'll hit 13 first, but here's the situation. When it comes to the occults, cults, and the satanic agenda, the power elite, they deploy, or those who deploy, numbers in the use of magic. Now, some people think magic is just for kids, but just like Hollywood, so aptly named, it's actually having you take part in this magic show. Imagine sitting in a theater and the magician's performing magic. Well, and you're just not an observer, but you are a participant, if not active, then certainly passive participant. And the magician performs his show. Well, in a lot of ways, that's foreign policy. In a lot of ways, that's what we're seeing in Syria. In a lot of ways, this is what we're seeing domestically with the economy and globally with the economy. In a lot of ways, isn't it interesting that people will comment on the numbers of the lottery that will come up on a certain day and find significance in that? But what is the significance of that? When it comes to the occult and cults that deploy numbers in the use of magic, Pythagoras, the Pythagorean theorem, you recall that? Well, Pythagoras is the father of the numbers, of all numbers, in his teachings are, when I say all numbers, I'm talking about the basis for the occult numbers.
You said the Pythagorean?
Pythagoras,
like the Pythagorean Brotherhood?
Pythagorean
the
theorem.
Hellenism?
Yes,
okay.
yes. The Pythagoras, the same, one and the same. He's the father of the numbers, and his teachings are venerated by really all of the mystery schools in the secret, I believe the secret teachings of all ages.
Okay, so he's the father of the distortion of of God's system of numbers.
He taught only the initiates in his own mystery school the secrets of the numbering system developed by him. Now, the Illuminati closely followed the precepts first introduced by Pythagoras, but Pythagoras, I suppose, is the correct pronunciation. But if you go back in time, people talk about Manly Hall, okay? Wrote the book, The Secret Teaching of All Ages. Manly Hall devotes chapter 13 to Pythagoras. Well, if Pythagoras taught only his initiates, or in his own mystery school, the secrets of the numbering system, and the Illuminati are following closely this, so we should pay attention. What do these numbers mean?
13, the number is representative of rebellion. The very first use of the number 13 in the Bible introduces us to this concept. 12 years they served Charlemagne.
Right.
Goodness.
Right.
In the 13th year, they rebelled.
Right.
It goes on to say that worldwide usually consists of 13 members, witches. Consists of 13 members, and the Bible tells us that rebellion is the sin of witchcraft. 1 Samuel 15:23. 12 is the number of perfect government, but 13 is one too many.
Okay, yeah. There are 13 members in covens and satanic cults. 12 regular members and one high priest. So that's where we get 13. Folks, please hang with us because you'll see how all this connects. 13 members in covens and satanic cults, 12 regular members, one high priest. This is a mirroring of 12 jurors, one judge, 13. There are 13 high occult families that run the world. Are there not? The number 13, as you point out, it's extremely significant in both the Bible as well as the Illuminati. Each group within the Illuminati has a core of 39 members. Now, when we deal with numerology and occult significance, you have variations of numbers. You break down numbers. You multiply numbers via a specific way. Well, 39 members breaks down into 3 13s. Okay, 13 times 3 members. 13 makes up an administrative group, and that group answers to a round table that consists of 9 members. Before we get into 9, I'll just say this: the 9 significance is significant because it relates to the triplicate of 3 that's considered very important. All rituals, such as 3 times 3 times 3, so on. But the 3 times 3 times 3 rule in magic applies to an amplification of the original intention of a cast ritual. So we're getting into 13 and 3, but 13, again, as you point out, now you've got it right there. It first occurs, the use, does it not first occur in Genesis?
Yes, it first occurs in Genesis 14:4, and then it says in Samuel 1 Samuel 15:23, rebellion is as the sin of witchcraft, witches covenants worldwide have usually consisted of 13 numbers, and the Bible tells us rebellion is as the sin of witchcraft. 1 Samuel 15:23 goes on to say, 13 and 11 are both numbers of rebellion. 11 in the sense of falling short, and 13 in the sense of an extra agent being present. In the Gospels, we see that God wants the numbers set straight. The divine order of things includes numerical consistency.
This is also Masonic signatures when we look at different things taking place.
You look at the back of a dollar bill. You have the 13 berries, the 13 leaves, the 13 arrows, it's consistent.
Well, let's get into that. There are 13 leaves on the left olive branch with 13 berries. There are 13 stripes on the middle shield. Now we're talking about the official seal, the Masonic symbols of power in the United States, but the seal of that you find, as you pointed out, Joe, on the back of your money. 13 arrows on the right, 13 stars above the phoenix's head. Some say it's an eagle. Is it an eagle or is it a phoenix? We'll talk about that later. The bird's head, 13 stars above the bird's head. 13 letters in E pluribus unum or unum on the ribbon. 13 letters in the other phrase. There are 13 blocks from top to bottom on the pyramid. 13 bloodlines. 13 blocks represent the 13 satanic families. Now you might
13
think this
in a baker's
crazy.
dozen.
Okay. So when you look at these different things, and just look at, for example, if we say the Freemasons, and Paul McGuire talks about this, and others we've had on our show talk about this, about the Freemasons, the structure, and Steve Quayle has talked about this as well. The Masonic power structure. When you begin studying this, and really what the push is behind this Masonic power structure, you will be running into the numbers 13 and 33, and as you pointed out earlier, I think 3, Joe, as well, and 9.
I said 13 in a baker's dozen because we are told here, that 13 is, as 11 is falling short, in a sense of falling short. 13 has this, in the sense, as an extra agent being present. The baker's dozen being 13 is obviously one more than what is supposed to be there. And it's kind of ironic or eerie how that fits in,
What I find interesting.
You're muted.
What I find interesting the most, I guess I was open hot earlier, but what I find interesting is if you take a look at the Bilderberg group, the core members there are 39 members. Now, is that by accident or by design? Of course it's by design. But why 39? Why not 38? Why not 50? Well, 39 members, core members. If you don't think that we're witnessing satanic ritualistic groups here, then, well, just keep listening. 39 members of the Bilderberg group, broken into 3 groups of 13 members apiece. Now, the core of 39 answers to the 13 who make up the policy committee. You see, the numbers have practical applications in current groups, current circles, and especially the power structure that is the Masons, the Freemasons, and people will say, well, my brother's a Mason. Well, okay, fine. We're talking about it's just like government. Everything is compartmentalized. And unless you know the secret, the super secret, the high level, unless you're on the high levels of things, you're not going to understand what's really going on. The Constitution, by the way, has 7 articles, was signed by 39 members of the Constitutional Convention. Interesting. But occultists the world over believe that once a symbol is created, for example, the symbol on the back of the dollar bill, it has a power of its own, and more power is generated when such symbols are created without the uninitiated, without you and I knowing about it. This is why, for example, you've got the seal, this Masonic seal on the back of our money. And isn't it interesting that everyone is touching and passing around this money, and with that, everyone's passing around this seal with the symbols. Now you know why it was put on money, because what is the medium of exchange here in the United States? The paper money. These Illuminists believe that once the symbol is created, it acquires power of its own, and more power is generated when we, the idiots out there, or the people who aren't paying attention or don't understand what's really going on, are handling it and are taking part in this process. We don't even know about it. The greatest power of all in the mind of the Illuminati in terms of the symbols, for example, on the money, is that we never discover what it actually represents. You see how we're being hoodwinked here? I believe we're being hoodwinked in such a way that we're being made to participate in a really profane, satanic-like agenda. And this is why it's important. So, the significance of 13, we're all, look, we know it is this number of, bad luck, ill omen, whatever you want to call it, Friday the 13th. There's a superstition surrounding it. And you'll find if you go back and start researching the superstition angle to the number 13 or Friday the 13th, you'll see that it does lead back to what we're talking about right now. But we don't see, people normally just don't go back far enough because the popular explanations don't go back far enough. That's why that's why we always say bigger. The lie is bigger, and go back farther and look at the whole picture. As you pointed out, the first occurrence of the number 13 in order to discover the key to its significance is found in Genesis, where we read 12 years. 12 years they served Chedorlaomer, and the 13th year they rebelled. So hence every occurrence of the number 13, and likewise every multiple of it, stamps that with which it stands in connection with rebellion, with apostasy, with defection, with corruption, with disintegration, with revolution. You get the idea, right? Wasn't America founded in rebellion or by rebellion of England? The number 13, as is the number 33, is the number of Freemasons. If you look in the nation's capital, the father of one nation under God, George Washington, is memorialized in the rotunda on the ceiling of the Capitol. If you've been there, it's incredible. You look up and you see this. The picture of this painting, and I think I might even have a photograph that when I was in the Capitol. Joe, you and I were there together, I believe. But the mural pictures, Washington surrounded by how many, you want to take a guess, how many maidens or women servants? 13. Now, you might say, well, so what? Well, at some point you've got to stop and say, none of this is really a coincidence. It's interesting. You want an occurrence, a practical application of significance? Think back to, consider August 6, 1945, at 8:15 in the morning. B-29 bomber Enola Gay dropped an atomic bomb called Little Boy on Hiroshima, Japan. By the way, Hiroshima was near Japan, near the 33rd parallel. You know what the mission number was for the Enola Gay? 13. This was the first day of a new age, the atomic age, the nuclear age. And in order for us to understand the change that took place at that very moment, with mission number 13, the dawning of the nuclear age, we've got to go back in history and make sure we fully understand the importance of the number 13 and the formation of the United States to the atomic bomb explosion in Hiroshima. It's fascinating. So if we look back at the formation of the United States, there was an author, Paul Foster Case. In 1935, he wrote that since the date 1776 is placed on the bottom course of the pyramid on the Great Seal, and since the number 13 has been so important in the history of the United States and in the symbols of the seal, it's not unreasonable to suppose that the 13 courses of the pyramid represent 13 time periods of 13 years each. So if you look at the 13 time periods of 13 years, that equals 169 years. Isn't it interesting? From July 4th, 1776 to July 4th, 1945 equals 169 years. Oh, and by coincidence, from July 4th, 1945 to August 6th, the day that Hiroshima was bombed, on the 33rd or near the 33rd parallel, it was 33 days. Do you think that some of this might be a little bit beyond coincidence? I do believe that it's very possible. Kennedy, President John F. Kennedy, well, he was wounded or stricken. Yeah, I'm inventing new words. He was shot in the exact same spots as Hiram Abif. That Hiram Abif was murdered in the Masonic initiation representing the persecution of the Templars in 1307 on Friday the 13th. He was struck in the back, in the throat, and in the head. There is a connection. Now, could that be coincidence? Of course it could. But you know what doesn't seem like coincidence? Where's Dealey Plaza? If you take a map and look at Dealey Plaza, you're looking at a very close proximity to the 33rd parallel, much like Hiroshima. Could this mean something? Are we stretching things? I've wondered this. I looked at this and say, could we be stretching this? Could we be just seeing shadows where there are none? I don't think so. Not when you look at everything combined. If you look at the motto on the back of the dollar, or you look at the highest degree of the Scottish Rite of Freemasonry, the degree of the Illuminati, it's order out of chaos, or out of chaos comes order. Which means literally that if they break down the existing structure and cause us to cry out for order, the Illuminati, the power brokers, are going to emerge as the rulers and will have the world that they seek. So looking at this, are we not seeing right now this breakdown of order? When we talked about the news earlier, about the ammunition that's being ordered, about the guns, and about the disarming us, and even if you look at the healthcare law, as it were, is this not designed to create chaos? Is not everything, to me, everything that we're seeing right now is creating chaos. Some 13s that are important, and if you've got to take a step back and really consider this all at once. May 13th, 1914. What happened back then? Remember the vision at Fatima? May 13th, 1941. Stalin. Well, in preparation for war, he divides Russia into 7 separate and distinctly different districts. Remember May 13th, 1981? Some of you do. On that day, someone attempted to assassinate the Pope. Remember that? And I don't think it's any coincidence that May 13th, 2000, some 19 years later, the third secret of Fatima, stemming back to the May 13th, 1914 vision and subsequent visions, the third secret was partially revealed. It was also related to the shooting of the Pope on May 13th, 1981. And speaking of the Pope, isn't it interesting that on May 13th, 2000, that same day, the Pope at the time alludes to the beast rising out of the sea. In the book of Revelation, the beast has 7 heads. Yeah. Is this all coincidence? Sure, it could be. Make your case for coincidence. We're making our case for perhaps something more. The number 13, the Cuban Missile Crisis. How long did that last? 12 days, right? No, 13 days. Wasn't there a movie, 13 Days in October? Different movies. You talk about Hollywood being, for example, magic, trickery. The Hollywood being this venue for such. The movies that we see. Do you think that there's any possible messages in the movies that are coming out that the Illuminati and power structure want us to see? And if so, how long has this been going on? That's the question I had to ask. Did it start like in 2001? No. In fact, no. It goes back a long time. It goes back quite a while. Look, in 1952 movie, 13 East Street. 1962, 13 West Street. These are movies. 1960, 13 Fighting Men. 1960, 13 Ghosts. 1948, 13 Lead Soldiers, Lead Scholars. Okay, we'll make that movie. 1938, 13 Men and a Gun. 1995, Apollo 13. 1963, 13 Frightened Girls. And folks, by the way, there is something so sinister, so very sinister about Hollywood and about the Illuminati message that goes back into the 60s, the Charles Manson era, the Beatles era. There's something so sinister about that. We'll be getting into that into a subsequent program. But all of this, ladies and gentlemen, all of this does have present-day implications. And I go back to saying to you, the Maypole celebration, this Illuminati occult Maypole celebration that we're going to be talking about, has present-day significance. It's extremely important to understand this, because when we're looking at this, when we're looking at events take place today, or this year, I suppose is better, we have to understand where these occult holidays and sabbats, where these Satanists believe that these numbers contain inherent power. It's within these, it's within these satanic holidays that the Illuminati believe that these numbers all that contain inherent power. They literally order their lives by this occult numerology, and this occult numerology is a key component in astrology. The occult calendar, and I suppose we can get into this very quickly here, is divided into 4 segments of 13 weeks each, and that's Joe, that's what the research that we've done, that we've printed out here, looking at the occult calendar, we can look to see what's going on right now. Where are we, and what's coming up, and where do these numbers fit in? For example, 13.
Yeah, and I guess to put this all into better perspective, Satan was defeated when Jesus died on the cross. And he said, "Behold, I give you power and authority to trample on serpents and scorpions and over the power of the enemy, and nothing by any means shall hurt you. And for sin shall not have dominion over you. You are not under the law, but under grace." That's in Romans 6:14. The Holy Spirit gives us wisdom to recognize what is deception and what is truth, and to overcome the world and the problems and tribulations that the world brings. The authority that we have in the Lord is to conquer. He gives us authority to conquer these evil spirits through the power of the Holy Spirit. So, as a believer, we have to operate in this.
When you say, I'm sorry for interrupting. When you say evil spirits, it almost sounds like a movie or a TV show. You're talking about demonic entities, right?
Yes.
Like Rosdistar.
Yes.
Demonic. Okay.
Yeah, we not only have the authority, we, especially us living in this time, must overcome these demonic presence through our faith. And the only thing that we can do is spiritually prepare and be born again and grow our faith in the Lord. And in order to
that's our
use our authority, we have to be able to recognize the enemy and know where who is the enemy and what is right and wrong. We can do this, as I said, by growing closer to the Lord. But by overcoming the world, overcoming our flesh, how do we do that if we do not understand what is what?
And this is why we have Michael Arevna come on, and Russ Dizdar has talked about this. Once again, Paul McGuire and others have talked about it. Nathan Leal, they've all talked about this, and Steve Quayle, in one way, shape, or form. But to be grounded in this reality, it's an alternate reality to which, folks, you and I are used to. It's not our reality. It's really not, because when you go through the drive-through at Starbucks or McDonald's and hand the clerk a $5 bill, or maybe more, I don't know, these days. I mean, but black coffee anymore is, $3? But at Starbucks. But the fact of the matter is, when you use the money, you're actually, and this is just one example, you're actually participating in this, or they believe you're participating in this empowerment.
Well, I want to read a quick sentence from a book Brother Marcus sent me, "Destroy the Works of the Enemy," which says this. It says, to possess the land, and they're talking about the land, is the forces are scattered across all the land. It says, we Christians must take possession of our land back from the control of Satan. To possess the land means to boldly face the enemy and his works. So, in order to face the enemy and his works, we must understand who the enemy is and what his works are.
Exactly. Now, we've got Valentine's Day coming up here, and everyone's going to celebrate Valentine's Day. What's the significance of Valentine's Day for example, if you would ask, I don't know, your Uncle Fred, for example, what's the significance of Valentine's Day? What's the bad significance of Valentine's Day? Well, Joe, why don't you field that question? What do you think Uncle Fred or Uncle Frank or Uncle Marvin would say about Valentine's Day with respect to all of the backstory?
Honestly, I'm not even, I know there's some St. Valentine comes to mind. I do not know the actual story behind Valentine's Day.
Okay.
I never liked it anyway, the holiday.
No, but we're celebrating actually a pagan ritual. People don't go back far enough. People will say, the St. Valentine's Day Massacre, and think in those terms. But if you go back to if you go back to 296 BC, and this is in the encyclopedias, folks. You can look at this. Get off the internet. Go to a library and look at the various works, the encyclopedias, and even some of the alternative books about the occult and mysticism. You'll be surprised what you find in these in the libraries. Actually, how many people anymore actually pick up a book, a physical paper and cardboard book? It's amazing, but it's amazing what you find in there. But if you go back to 296 BC, there was this worship of the god Pan, which pagan worship. Cupid is the Latin name for the god of sexual love. Now, folks, please, I'm not assailing the. I'm not trying to ruin your Valentine's Day for you and the missus or you and the mister or your significant other at all. No. Just trying to give you some information as to where this came from and why it's important to recognize it for what it is. If you recognize it for what it actually is, where it came from and why, then it's up to you. But if you go back to the pagan Romans, they celebrated February 14th and 15th as an idolatrous, sensuous festival. Now, this was done in honor of a pagan god, Lupercus, the hunter of wolves. Now, on that day, which was later, actually that day was named after Lupercus, but it was later named Valentine's Day. The Luperci, apparently that's a plural for Lupercus, or priests were dressed in goat skins for a bloody ceremony. Now, once again, you might say, well, so what? That's beyond us. That's not us today. The origins, the priests. Remember we talked Sunday about the blood of Jesus? Well, the priests made red. Their bodies were painted blood of sacrifices, of human sacrifices. At times, it began with the sacrifices of goats and dogs and other small animals. But they'd run around in a wild frenzy, covered in blood, in a goatskin thong. It kind of sounds like Bohemian Grove on a Thursday. I don't know, man. But women would sit around the hill that they would run around, and the bloody priest would strike them with their goatskin thongs to make them, you ready for this, fertile. So ladies, when you see your husbands dressing up in their goatskin thongs and smacking you around on Friday, you'll know that they've been researching this. The young women would gather in the city, and their names would be put in boxes, and these were love notes. They were called billets, or billets, if you will. The men of Rome would draw one of these love notes, and the woman whose name was on it became his sexual lust partner, with whom he would, do the thing until the next Valentine's Day. So what we're celebrating come this Friday is a day of unbridled sexual lust. That's the origin of Valentine's Day. You might, again, well, so what? You've got to look at it in the context. That's just one example. But look at it in the context of the satanic ritualistic holidays. And you think, oh, man, are you serious? I mean, look, folks, even Groundhog Day has significance as one of the Illuminati, one of their human sacrifice nights. Can you believe that? I wonder if Bill Murray knows about that. Here's the deal. The occult calendar is comprised of 4 periods of 13 weeks each. Here they are. Number 1, the winter solstice, 13 weeks. The spring equinox, 13 weeks. The summer solstice, 13 weeks. And, of course, the autumn equinox, another 13 weeks. The winter solstice starts with a minor Sabbath on, December 21st, the day of the winter solstice, which is also known as Yule, December 21st through the 22nd. One of the Illuminati sacrifice nights. By the way, you heard us mention this before. On February 1st and 2nd, Candlemas. It's also known as Groundhog's Day. Another one of the Illuminati human sacrifice nights. And then, of course, we come to Valentine's Day, which is now this week. And I just spoke to the origins of Valentine's Day. The spring equinox. And this is where we're getting into, of course, Valentine's Day, and now we're getting into the spring equinox. The 21st and 22nd of March begins the spring equinox. The goddess Astara. Easter is the first Sunday after the first new moon after Astara, which is the spring equinox dedicated to the goddess Astara. March 21st, the day of the spring equinox, is one of the Illuminati's human sacrifice nights as well. Folks, let me remind you, it doesn't matter if you and I believe this stuff. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter if we subscribe to this. What matters is the people, like the people who sit behind the tables at the Bilderberg conferences, and you see all the protests outside the Bilderberg conferences. Do they know? Do the people know? Do the protesters know what really the carnal, the significance, the occult significance that's taking place with these?
Yeah, and the word of the Lord clearly states that we are not to be ignorant of Satan's devices.
Thank you for that. Yeah, we're not to be.
Satan would, in this book, again, referring to this book, it says that the Satan and the evil demon spirits would like nothing better than for us to believe that demons cannot influence the life of a born-again believer. This is one of Satan's subtle ways of deceiving people's lives, causing Christians to believe that they are immune to demonic attack. Satan uses demons to wreck their lives in the process.
When Stan was on yesterday, and it was interesting because I did happen to look over the chat, and I saw a comment fly by, and somebody said, "Oh, sounds like last week's program," which is fine. I mean, and I get that. I understand that. I really do. But it's so important. Some things are so important that they need to be driven home, because, folks, you can go tomorrow or today or right now and simply punch up on the internet the news. You can punch up the different takes on the news, and the news is important. But the more I got into this, and this is just me, the way I look at this, and I use my experience as an investigator because I like to know why people are doing things. I like to know the motive behind things. I like to also be able to know, for example, if I'm just curious by nature. But if we know why and why things are set up the way they are, then we can understand when things happen. For example, the deception that's coming. Do you think it's going to be rooted in Christianity, or is it going to be rooted in the playbook of the occult, of the demonic? I would submit it would be the latter. So how are we to exactly recognize this? Well, of course, we recognize it through the Word of God, but we also have to have the knowledge, in my view, to recognize it as a deception as well. You might be able to recognize the deception or suspect the deception through the playbook and receive confirmation through Scripture. But having both does serve to bolster and put you on better, more solid ground, in my view. So at any rate, once again, let me just review here. The first season, beginning at the first part of the year, or the first segment of the year, beginning with the winter solstice. The winter solstice is 13 weeks from December 21st through February 14th. Then comes a spring equinox for and it does. Those February 14th and the Yule December 21st are the high holy days, for lack of a better descriptive term. But it doesn't end on February 14th. It extends for the 13 weeks through March 20th. And then March 21st through the 22nd begins the spring equinox, in which the goddess Ostara is celebrated. And, of course, Easter is the first Sunday after the first new moon after Ostara. And March 21st, the spring equinox, is the human sacrifice night. Now, let me make a comment about human sacrifice nights. And as we enter into April 19th to May 1st, to me, looking at this from my seat here, and I've spent a lot of time researching this, Joe has as well, we talk about the Sochi Olympics and about the symbolism. We talk about the geopolitical affairs after the Olympics. Putin, for example, going to come out swinging after the Olympics. Well, does this match up? Does this have any parallels with the cult or the Illuminati feast days and time periods? It does. It does. April 1st, I'll just get this out of the way. That's, of course, All Fool's Day. It's exactly 13 weeks since New Year's Day. Coincidence? No, I think not. To be the Fool's Day. But April 19th to May 1st, this is the Beltane Festival that culminates in the Maypole celebration. This is what we were talking about, referencing yesterday, and this is kind of our focus now. Because we're coming up on this.
And these, rituals and sacrifices are talked about all the way back in Leviticus 17:7. They shall no more offer their sacrifices to demons after who they have played the harlot. They shall be a statute forever for them throughout their generation.
Fantastic. So there is biblical basis. There is a biblical basis for what we're talking about. And there's this perversion as well. Much like we discussed this, much like the birth of Jesus Christ, Jesus' birth, and the celebration of Christmas, how the perversion of his birth was made to conform to an occult pagan holiday that is of use to the Illuminati and the power brokers. So just understand what we're seeing here. And the use, well, I mentioned that, the pagan roots of the popular symbols of Christmas, such as a Christmas tree, which is a sacred tree of the winter god, which the Druid priests believed the spirits of their gods resided in the tree. And, of course, most ancient pagans knew the tree represented Nimrod. Okay? The pagans looked upon the tree as, yes, and I'm sorry for this, but a phallic symbol. It seems to all go around the male, female, Adam, Eve, circle and a stick, two-ball cane roots, doesn't it? More after the break. Folks, you're listening to the Hagmann and Hagmann Report on this, the 12th day of February 2014, painstakingly reviewing the Illuminati, what's behind this, and it's good to know their playbook.
The third and final hour of the Hagmann and Hagmann Report on this Wednesday, February 12th, 2014. We are talking about satanic and pagan holidays and demonic influences and spirits in our world today, and how they have captivated the unwilling, the willing.
They regard us as the profane. You see, that's folks, you and I, the uninitiated, the people who are not part of the secret society, the special handshake or the profane.
Well, this is really boils down to, this is a battle for our soul. It's fought in our hearts and our minds. And the scriptures clearly state several things that we need to do in order to be on the right path. One being the Word of God being, implanted into our mind, as it says in James 1:21. Therefore, lay aside all filthiness and overflow of wickedness, and receive with meekness the implanted Word, which is able to save your souls. And we are told in many other scriptures, I have a whole bunch here, of what can happen, if our mind is not right. And we were told in 1 Corinthians, that we were created with the mind of Christ, and that our mind is also carnal, and that carnal mind is enmity against God, because the carnal mind is enmity against God, for it is not subject to the law, nor can it be.
Exactly.
And we need to, it says the mind is the battleground for our thoughts. The mind governed by the flesh produces spiritual death. The mind governed by the Spirit of God produces life and peace. So finding freedom for your mind and your heart under the grace of the Lord, we have to, this is a two-way street. We have to put work in, if you would call it that. We have to put our time in to learn what God has done for us, to learn what is happening in the world, and to learn what God wants us to do for Him while we are here.
Folks, a couple of things. Let me know by email. Go ahead and go to HomelandSecurityUS.com. Click on the left-hand side. My name appears, and if you click on my name, it'll open up a dialog box, email dialog box. Just go ahead and do that at some point. Let me know if you find programs like this informative and helpful. And the reason I say this is because I'd like a gauge to know. We'd like a gauge, Joe and I, as we talk about these things. Sometimes, as I said earlier, you may think, well, this doesn't have anything to do with what's taking place today. Oh, but it does. It speaks to the larger, more in-depth agenda. It provides context for which we're seeing. So let me know if, yay or nay, is this good? Do you like this or not? Maybe like is not the correct word. Is it helpful? So feel free to do that. Of course, I read all emails I get. I cannot respond to every one. It's just incredible. But before we move on, I do want to say this. I've got an email from Joan. This one I do.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Oh, not to interrupt, but it just came to my mind before I forget it. I know we've asked for prayers for Carlos and his surgery earlier.
Yes.
I'd never heard how that came out.
It went very spectacular, and I will say this, and it's my fault for not providing the status update, but the surgery for Carlo, France, friend of Karen in Rome, was a success, and in no small part was it because of your prayers, folks. I believe that did take place. It was a complicated, very serious surgery, in your prayers. So let's see if we can focus your prayers on Joan, a listener, her mother May. Let's keep May in our prayers. She's a great lady, mother of 10. You've got to be a great lady to have a mother of 10. Now, today she was diagnosed with stage 4 cancer. Joan writes that this is heartbreaking news for them, and May needs a lot of prayers. Let's uplift May in prayer, as well as Joan and May and her family. It's a rough situation. I've been through it in terms of family members, and I'm sure many of you have been through it. You know how rough it is. So on behalf of Joan, who asked all of you to keep May, her mother, in your prayers, diagnosed today with stage 4 cancer. You know, we can move mountains. We can move mountains through prayer. And remember Pastor Langford and Steve talking about faith. That's what it's all about, having faith. Going back to numerology, gematria and such, and the significance of numbers, Larry writes, Larry M. from California, and I thought I might have brushed up with this, but the number of original American colonies, 13. Number of stripes on the American flag, 13. Indeed, as Chris S. writes the same, colonies in the United States, 13 original colonies. The pyramid on the back of the dollar, according to Scott M., another email, each step on the pyramid is a Katun, that's K-A, or Katun, K-A-T-U-N, and you can look that up in Wikipedia, which is 19.7 years. And he goes on, which I think this is pretty relevant. If you start at July 4th, 1776, and you factor in 12 steps of the Katun, the pyramid, you come up with, let's see here, 1,776.5 plus the 236.556. You're looking at the inauguration day for Barack Hussein Obama, the last president of the United States. And he writes, go ahead and do the math off air. It comes to around 10 a.m. Eastern Time on 1/20/13. It's interesting how that works out. And he also notes that Obama is the last president according to the dollar bill prophecy. Now, that's something that, folks, we can work out off air, and certainly we can work out, on our own time. But it's interesting how all of these create this fertile ground for what we're seeing. And right before the break, I was talking as well. Joe and I were talking about this. You know what? I should point this out. Isn't this interesting? What does this have to do with anything that's taking place today? Well, guess what washed up on the beach at Gaza yesterday? You want to guess? A statue of Apollo. At the same time, Obama is saying that he can do whatever he wants. And suddenly Apollo, the god Apollo, or a statue of the god, small g Apollo, Horus worshiper, or for Horus worshipers, washes up on the beaches of Gaza. Apollo, think back to Apollyon Rising by Tom Horn. If you don't have that book, I highly recommend Apollyon Rising 2012. It goes into much of what we're talking about today in terms of the Illuminati. But see, isn't it interesting? It's almost like this symbolism, where this beast rising from the abyss, or in this case, rising from the sea and onto the shores of Gaza, the very area of contention right now in the Middle East. Timing, is it coincidental? Well, it may well be. Or could it be an ill omen? Think about it. But as we approach the Maypole celebration, consider that from April 19th through May 1st, this is the blood sacrifice to the beast. Fire sacrifice is required on April 19th. April 30th to May 1st, the Beltane Festival and the Walpurgis Night. This is the highest day on the Druidic Witches calendar. May 1st is the Illuminati's second most sacred holiday that requires a human sacrifice. Now, if you look at these, consider what has happened in the past on April 19th. Folks, can you think of anything significant that happened on, we'll say, April 19th, 1995, or April 19th, 1945, or, well, you pick. April 19th. This period, this April 19th to May 1st, is a period of blood sacrifice, a very critical 13-day period. And once again, fire sacrifice is required at the beginning of this feast. April 19th is the first day of the 13-day satanic ritual relating to fire, the fire god Baal, or Moloch, Nimrod, the sun god, and is also known as the Roman god Saturn. This is the day. This day is a major human sacrifice day demanding fire sacrifice with an emphasis on children. Now, one of the most important human sacrifice days, and as such has some very important historic events, have occurred on this day. Now, remember, the Illuminati considers war to be an expedient method of sacrifice, for it kills both children and adults. Let's just take a look at what happened on April 19th throughout the years, just very quickly, and see if these events could have been staged according to or consistent with the calendar of events here. Blood sacrifice, April 19th, 1775. Of course, we know that as being the Battle of Lexington and Concord. That, of course, it made the Revolutionary War inevitable. April 19th, 1943, if you know World War II history, the Nazis entrapped the last Jewish resistance fighters in a storm drain in Warsaw, held them for several days. The stormtroopers began to pour fire into each end of the storm drain using flamethrowers. They continued pouring the fire into the drain until all of the resistance fighters, the Jewish resistance fighters, were dead. This blood sacrifice was brought about by a fiery conflagration. 50 years later to the day, April 19th, 1993, government troops, tanks, and other military equipment stormed the compound at, that's right, Waco. Can you see, and let me just ask, ladies and gentlemen, of all days, remember that siege, that siege at Waco, that length of time. Why did they, of all days, select April 19th? Why not April 18th? Why not April 21st? Why have it at all, of course, but why, of all days, April 19th? Do you think, folks, that this particular operation at Waco fulfilled the least requirements for a human sacrifice? You've got trauma, you've got fire, you've got children as sacrificial victims on April 19th, 1993. And then, of course, 2 years later, April 19th, 1995, Oklahoma City bombing. How many children were killed that day? April 19th of any year in the 20th century seems to be a day of fearful contemplation. And as we look at this, as we head into this final stretch of time, it would appear to me, and I think Joe would agree, and I think, ladies and gentlemen, you would agree after listening to Nathan Lee Allen and everyone else that we've had on, that Satan, the Luciferians, the Illuminati, they're becoming much more bold, much more in your face. And if you look at the time period, especially in the 20th century, April 19th is being used more often and more blatant and more in your face. And of course, you've got April 30th to May 1st, the Maypole celebration, but the Beltane Festival. This is the highest day on the Druidic witches calendar. May 1st is the Illuminati's second most sacred holiday. Human sacrifice is required. Now, since the celebration officially began the night before Beltane, the tradition has developed among the occultists to celebrate this as a 2-day ceremony. Is it interesting that, or just coincidental, that Hitler killed himself on April 30th at 3:30 p.m., creating this 333? You'd think that there was some sort of occultish aspect to Hitler. We know. Just watch the History Channel or the Discovery Channel, or what is the History Channel and other, whatever the Hitler Channel is. If you look at the Nazis and the occult, don't take my word for it. This is now mainstream, how the occult and Nazis, well, what the occult agenda was with the Nazis. And Doc Marquise talks about this, but let's get to what's really coming up here. On the eve of Beltane, April 30th, great bonfires are lit in order to welcome the Earth Goddess, Earth Day. Think about Earth Day, the worship of the Earth. You see, these satanic participants hope to gain favor with this goddess. Why? Well, so she will bless their families with fertility. Isn't it interesting that the Royal House of Windsor currently, this year, will light a Beltane fire? And yes, to me, this is this coincidental? Of course not. This is the worship of the Earth Goddess. So what about Maypole? Well, Maypole originated from the celebration of Beltane. Since fertility is being asked of the Earth Goddess, the Maypole is, yes, the phallic symbol. And the circular dance, we talked about this briefly, but I don't think we can overstate this. The circular dance around the pole forms the circle that is symbolic of the female sex organ. Of course, the pole itself, the 4 6-foot alternating red and white ribbons are connected to the pole, and the young men would dance counterclockwise, or the ladies dance clockwise. The union of the intertwining red and white ribbons symbolize the act of the sex, of copulation. And remember, this is a fertility celebration day. So this all plays into this pagan holiday. But as I mentioned earlier, along with the Maypole celebration, what are they celebrating aside from the fertility aspect of things? What's the celebration about? The children dancing around the Maypole. They're the survivors of the child blood sacrifice, the sacrifice of trauma during this period of time. To avoid detection, and I mentioned this earlier in an earlier show, to avoid detection, the village people with children, villagers would snuff out their fires to avoid detection. Yet a communal fire would be made in the town square for this sacrificial act of sacrificial rite, and children would be sacrificed. The children dancing around the Maypole are dancing because, well, they weren't the ones that were selected for sacrifice. So at the end of all this, people who had snuffed out their fires and to avoid detection went to the communal fire, the very pit where the children, perhaps their children or their neighbors' children, were sacrificed, grabbing a coal and ember from that fire, taking it to their homes and using it to start their fires. Why is this important? Look at it in the context of the dollar bill, of the money, of the folding money with the symbolism on the back. We all touch it. We all take part in this ritualistic ceremony, give power to the symbols? Isn't this what is taking place, where even the people who did not participate directly in the celebration are, because they're taking home the blood, the result, the tool of the blood and the sacrifice of the children to light their home fires? Isn't that sort of the way things are taking place today? The ritualistic way things are taking place? Do you think it's important to know this? I do. And it's also significant to know that the greater the sacrifice, meaning the greater the trauma, the better the trauma that occurred, the more they please the god, the goddess, the earth goddess, the more blessings bestowed upon the people. And of course, this is what it's all about. The greater the suffering, the better the sacrifice. So Maypole is a very paganistic celebration. And it's in this time period, from the time period between April 19th to May 1st this year. Are we not looking at the geopolitical events taking place or shaping up to take place during that time period? Should we be concerned, folks, about the possibility of a mass child sacrifice during this time period? Did we not see in the Olympic ceremonies, the opening of the Olympic ceremonies, 2012, the Illuminati in London, the Illuminati symbolism involving child sacrifice? Yes, we did. What about the Super Bowl? What did Nathan Leal say about the Super Bowl? Go back and listen to that. Is there contextual indications that we're seeing a message given to us in advance of an event to say, hey, these are our plans? Now you see the context. Now you see the importance. Now you see that we're looking into the satanic Luciferian playbook. I do. You know, going back to Hollywood is really owned by and controlled by a Masonic influence. Even John Wayne was a Mason. Now, yeah, I like John Wayne, okay? Of course, what guy doesn't like John Wayne? I mean, but to be honest, intellectually honest, John Wayne was a Mason. How many of us as kids, now if you're my age, what did we play when we were kids? Remember playing cowboys and Indians? Who wanted to be the Indian? Indians really got their butts kicked, right? Well, John Wayne did a lot of Westerns, and there were a lot of spaghetti Westerns done during the same time period. Isn't that Hollywood's way? I'll pose this as a question. Could this perhaps be Hollywood's way of conveying through cinema the glorification of genocide with respect to the Indians? Now, before you go off and say, well, now this is really foolish, and it doesn't matter. If you just look at it from a very sanitary, unobjective perspective, look at the influence that Hollywood has. And speaking of Hollywood, I'm just going to throw out a couple of things here. This is not related to what we're talking about, but it's important because the things I found that relate to where we're at today, including Obama, Rosemary's Baby, Guess Who's Coming to Dinner? Those two movies are very significant. Oh, and during that same time period, and I'm not going to get into this tonight, we're not going to get into this tonight, the Beatles, the Tavistock Institute, the role British and American intelligence back then and today. the actions of our intelligence services, whether it be the NSA or the drones or the CIA spying or CIA operations, more accurately. Not only are these being told in advance what they're doing, but they have their roots back in the 60s and 50s in terms of Hollywood. Again, this is just kind of a bookmark for later. Even you think back, Star Trek. I was never a Star Trek fan. I mean, I watched it, once in a while. Gene Roddenberry, the creator of Star Trek, he was a Mason. Even the name Vulcan was the name of a Roman god. You see how Hollywood throws in these various nuances, these various little things. Remember Nathan Leal talking about the chevron, the shape of the chevron? The Star Trek chevron, that badge that they wore. Isn't it interesting? Star Trek was created, one could argue, to get people ready for a fake alien invasion. And what did Stan talk about last night? Which is why we talked again about it 2 weeks in a row. But last night I think it was very significant. Because what's going to usher in the New World Order? We could cite all day long the bullets of the DHS and the MRAPs and all of this. Yes, this is important. But of themselves, it's important to understand the deception that will occur with the New World Order and what's at stake but our eternal salvation. Our very souls are at stake here. And the devil, the satanic influence, the army of Satanists, they want to write your name in the book of death as the more names in their book of death, the better. So this is their playbook to get you to that position. We often say life imitates art, but, well, that's more truthful than people realize. Watch the movies. Start taking notice now. If you go to movies and if you look at television, watch and listen. You're going to see something interesting here. Watch for the numbers 13 and 33 to be slipped in various movies. I had earlier spoken about movies containing the number 13. This is all part of the Hollywood Masonic agenda. So when you're looking at, for example, 33, and I'm going to kind of wind down here with this in this part of things. When you look at number 33, think about it this way. There are 33 degree Masons are the receivers of this plan of action, this agenda, and the backbone to implement it. Oh, I should mention this. There are 33 titles in the Old Testament for the Antichrist. Well, there are just 13 in the New Testament. Coincidence? Or divinely inspired with a message. But 33s are bringing back the Old Testament Egypt, Isis, Osiris, Ra, Satan, Saturn, Horus, Apollo, whatever you want, Nimrod. I mean, pick a name. They're all the same God, small g. It's an ancient and violent and immoral world which developed before the flood. The Illuminists, the Satanists, the very people in power today are attempting to reestablish. They are seeking to reestablish this age under this new world order, this globalism, to be ruled again by 13, Satan, or if you're an Orthodox Jew, Satan, this New Testament Antichrist. This is why it's important. And just to remind you, isn't it interesting or prophetic, an omen perhaps? Statue of Apollo washing up in Gaza yesterday. A message? Coincidence? I don't know. The symbolic form of the beast rising from the abyss? It matters. I do. Now that I've dominated the entire program.
No, I was enjoying reading my book. No, I'm kidding. I was enjoying listening to you explain this. Are you going to keep going? Because I'm entertained.
Well, I just got a couple of emails here. You know, well, let's see here. I'm not sure if I can go through all of this. Let's see here. No, you know what? Why don't we just go ahead and Beltane, we still need to talk more about Beltane, and we still need to talk more about the Maypole celebration. And we still need to put more emphasis and context into the numbers. You know, we started out with numerology, Joe. You've done a lot of research on numerology, gematria, and all we're trying to do, folks, is to really identify what's really going on. I mean, we have no other agenda here. We're certainly not taken to fanciful flight, mental vacations, if you will, when we're talking about this, because all of this with numerology, with gematria, with the numbers 3313. Even Disney is a 33 Freemason, for example, and it's just interesting how all of these numbers and everything, all of this is just kind of connected, interconnected. The Druidic the Illuminati celebrations, and if you start getting back into the family, the family connections between the Bush family and others, and the corporations, you know, it's unbelievable what you'll find out, and you can really get lost in this, and that's not our intent for you to get lost in this. But just one other thing too before we hit the numbers. You know, look at all of the obelisks across the world and know that they represent the sexual organ of the kings who ruled the world. They're called obelisks. They can be found all across the world: Egypt, Ethiopia, India, you name it. Rome. There's 8 in Rome. Of course, Washington D.C. And isn't it interesting that that Obama and Bush faced the Washington Monument when taking their oath of office? Where did this monument come from? Very quickly, ancient Egypt, when Osiris, Nimrod, whatever, or Apollo, Osiris, his body was cut into 14 pieces, and Seth scattered them all over Egypt, in which his wife Isis retrieved all of them except one. And you know the one, folks, that body part that was not found, it was reportedly swallowed by a fish. So anyway, the king Osiris, who represents the below aspect of the as above, so below, in the king of planets, Jupiter specifically, who is now dead, dismembered, and has a piece missing, and the Queen Isis, whose name means throne, she of the throne, would take the place of the true king. See, in Egypt, in ancient Egypt, she was sometimes called the dark goddess and goddess for hell. Not a great name to have, I wouldn't think. And she was always, or often, I shouldn't say always, often shown or memorialized by carrying, well, I'll just say an obelisk, and you know what I mean. This is, and we get into the Jesuits as well, Adam Weishaupt, and 33-degree Freemasonry. You get into all of this, and how all of this connects. And I don't want to be painstakingly long, but I think it's very important to further discuss this at a later time. But know that we're coming up in a very serious period of history or period of time when everyone should be on the lookout for things to be taking place. Blood sacrifices. Let's just go a little bit more on the numbers, because just for an example, if you use gematria to match numbers to modern day things, corporations, people, logos even. You know, folks, if you do this, if you take a piece of paper and lay out, just on the piece of paper, write 1 through 26, and then underneath it match every number to a letter of the alphabet. There's 26 letters in the English alphabet. There's 26 numbers. It's a simple code. You can even do it in reverse from 26 with A and then down to Z being 1. It doesn't really matter. But see, what we have to realize is codes, these secret messages, and I wrote an article about this here a couple of months ago now. Our messages, when we look at different things, when we look at Biden standing in the Oval Office with Obama, the way he's holding, in fact, I made a point, the way he held this paper, this document, this notebook, okay, it seemed like he was almost signaling something. And we've seen the signaling, these secret handshakes. But are we seeing codes elsewhere? Are we seeing things communicated in logos in as well? It's interesting. CBS, for example, the logo appears to be the Eye of Horus.
Yeah.
Dairy Queen, the same thing. If you look at it that way.
The NASA space shuttle's names.
Yeah.
You know, Columbia Space Shuttle to Columbia Movies. There are definitely in-your-face examples of what is being perpetrated on the earth. And, you know, we think about the end times and the Antichrist, and we have to remember what John said is that there are, when he said that there are many Antichrists already when he, in his day. And in reading this book that somebody sent me, it's called Connections by Glenn Carpenter, and it
great book
where we get the numbers interpretations from. It talks about the beast system not only being a satanic element, but the evil nature of man, and how man, through their lusts, through their sin, are moved to, I mean, we see it today. I actually have a clip, if you want to play. There was a representative, Tim Holzenbeck. Let me see here. I'll pull this up from the original article. It's talking about God in marriage. He says, is a anti-gay GOP representative suggests marriage is like threesome with God.
see, okay, stop right there because that's so important to understand. You see the overlap. You see the...
And that title was changed since the time I...
right.
Before the show.
Imagine the agenda of the people, the Satanists, the Illuminati people, being this red Kool-Aid stain on your counter, and you take a paper towel and you just lay the paper towel over that liquid, and you see it permeate as that paper towel soaks up that red Kool-Aid. You could see it go through all that white. Perhaps it's a white paper towel, and it goes to the edges until the entire paper towel is soaked with that red Kool-Aid. That's what we're talking about here. This is what we're talking about. This strikes to the heart. This is the relevancy of what we're seeing. We're seeing an assault, an attack on Christianity, on the very moral fabric of our upbringing, on everything that's good, on everything that's godly, by these Satanists who are using all of this. For example, the pro-homosexual agenda, the militant pro-homosexual agenda, being used as an attack, a method of attack against our Christian beliefs and against Christianity and against the Word of God. And you know what? At the end of the day, this is what it's all about. It's about the fornication. It's about this lust. It's about the god of lust. It's about Osiris and the maypole every time. This symbolism, I suppose, I'm getting excited here in terms of talking about this because now you're seeing this in action. Oh, and just a couple other things too. If you look at the Procter and Gamble, I remember back in the 80s talking about this, the Procter and Gamble image having some various occultic symbol, reportedly having some various interesting symbolism there. And of course, Procter and Gamble vigorously denies such accusations. For example, the picture of the horned god or whatever it would be. They eventually, by the way, and I think it was in 1992 where they decided to slightly revise their logo, but nonetheless, look at Dodge. Are we driving around with a goat's head on our car or truck or Ram? It does appear that way. What about the logo for Subaru? Could we see, is that not the Pleiades? I mean, there's just so much here. Even the United Nations logo, 33 sections to the United Nations logo on the inner emblem, the gematria, and all of this. And the reason I went back to the numerology is to say that there's logos connected to the numerology, and logos are connected, as well as the agenda, which you mentioned, Joe, the anti-heterosexual, and I'll use that, anti-heterosexual militant agenda that conforms in a big way with the ancient God worship or worship of gods, small g, of course, that we are being made to partake in. Now this agenda is coming forward and manifesting itself in these types of perverse ways in which you just referenced. If you want to play that clip now, go ahead.
All right, here we go.
And so those who are listening, whether you're fathers or mothers or looking at that, recognize that even though the society, even though Hollywood will tell us it's all about you, it's not. It's all about someone else. It's all about that child. They need a father. They need a mother. And no one can be perfect. I have 4 kids myself. I'm reminded of that every day, oftentimes by my daughters themselves. But we aren't asking for perfection. We're just asking for that time to promote marriage and to spend the time with your spouse. If you're not married and you have children, look at getting married. That will stabilize and bring many things to your children. This is National Marriage Week. This is an opportunity here in our nation not only to talk about marriage, talk about its impacts, talk about how its loss has hurt our society. I firmly believe that we could spend endless amounts of money up here, and occasionally we do that. But you cannot replace the family. You cannot replace daddy. You can't replace mommy. We can do our best. We can help our neighbors. But as we debate the definition of marriage, where we have a court that on one hand in June says we're going to let the states decide, kinda, unless you're in California, and then on the other hand there's a federal definition or state definition. At the end of the day, it's all about how important marriage is. Marriage predates government. We might like to redefine it. In 1856, the Republican Party had a number of things in their platform. One is very important. They demanded a free Kansas. And being a Kansan, that we appreciated that and entered as a free state a few years later.
So we are now seeing the infusion of this immorality push.
Yeah, that ended early. What he's saying is he told the colleagues on the floor, there's a third person in your marriage. He, of course, is referring to God. And
by the way, isn't it interesting that it got...
Yeah, sometimes that happens with the uploading of the audios. I don't know why, because it appeared to be uploaded without issue. But he says marriage can be tough, but God is calling you to do everything you can. It's just not you and your spouse. There's a third person in your marriage, and God would like to bless and protect that marriage and give you fruitful days ahead. And
yeah.
The opponents of the LGBT rights think marriage should only be between one man and one woman,
which is what God has ordained from the beginning of man.
And this article says, but Representative Tim Huelskamp, a Republican from Kansas, told his colleagues on the floor that there's a third person and it's God. He was speaking out in support of the National Marriage Week, which aims to strengthen individual marriage, reduce the divorce rate, and build stronger marriage culture. The group also recognizes in particular that social science is clear that children are best served when they grow up with both a mother and a father. After he explained why it is important for kids to have both a mommy and a daddy, he finishes his remarks by speaking directly to all of those straight married couples out there watching him on C-SPAN.
Well, isn't it interesting? You hear this on the floor in the halls of Congress, but what we're seeing right now, and make no mistake about this, we are also seeing powerful symbols, powerful agendas now coming into a way out of the shadows. And when powerful symbols of the occult and satanic worship are openly displayed before all of us, before hundreds of millions, billions of people, is this not, folks, a spiritual indicator or warning of what is to come?
Listen to this. Listen to what this atheist group demands schools stop allowing students to help starving children. Atheists have nothing better to do than to attack people of belief with their unbelief, attacking a school for a service project which has the children packed food for starving people in Haiti because the project is associated with a church only shows the atheist inhumanity. The Apogany Humanist Legal Center sent a letter to the Robbinsdale area school after students packed meals for starving children in Haiti. Alliance Defending Freedom reported schools after an atheist group complained about students participating in a community service project at a church to pack meals for needy families in Haiti. Public schools should encourage students to participate in as many community service opportunities as possible. The Constitution does not prohibit students from cooperating in a religious organization to help starving families, which is not of any sort in government endorsement of religion, said the council lead legal counsel Matt Sharp. Neutrality towards religion does not permit schools to discriminate against beneficial programs simply because they are run by Christians. That is not neutrality. And the whole thing is here, the atheist group is saying it's better for children to starve than to be helped by a Christian group.
Which is exactly the area, the agenda, playing field that they have pushed this country into, or are pushing this country into. The children, it's the children. When you talk about the period between April 19th and May 1st, we're talking about child sacrifice, sacrifice of children. This is big by the proponents of this militant homosexual agenda, which identifies frequently with the agenda of the Illuminists. And isn't it interesting that here we sit, with the 3 billion of us, or the billions of us really across the world, who have been lulled, mesmerized, and even to the extent, could it be, and I'll pose this as a question, could it be, for example, the Olympic ceremonies were not just a performance, but a ritual in which by watching we took part in passively nonetheless. But it was a ritual being performed in front of us that served more than one purpose being the ushering in of this aggressive new agenda, post-church agenda. And I use that, those are my words, perhaps not technically accurate. The purpose of the true church, regardless of denomination, is to host the Holy Spirit, the restrainer of evil, and the spirit of the Antichrist from taking control of a nation. But what better way to take control of a nation than by what you just heard, and that's by the agenda to upset, to rend our moral fabric and the fabric of our country, of our founding moral values. And that's what I think is taking place. And they do this through numbers, through occult symbolism, through all of this. And folks, that's why it's so important to understand, not just discuss, not just talk about the events, but understand what's behind the events. With that, we've reached the conclusion of the program. You're muted here, my friend.
Well, we'll end with this. BBC propaganda. They published a piece entitled, "Why I Want a Microchip Implant." There you go.
And understand this, the transhumanism, the microchip, the changing of the DNA, which is something else we'll get into as well because it affects all of us. This we will be facing in a very short term.
God bless each and every one of you. Till tomorrow night, stay safe and stay warm, and we'll see you then. Have a great one.
Good night.